Hi, second grade. Going to read the second part of chapter 1. So listen really carefully, okay? So you can answer some questions. All right, here we go. Remember, as we ended up our last part of the chapter, we read that Huggins was trying to get this dog home, and the bus driver didn't want him on the bus, and so he's got to figure out what he's going to do. People were stopping on the corner to wait for the next bus. Among them, Henry noticed an elderly lady carrying a large paper shopping bag full of apples. The shopping bag gave him an idea. Jumping up, he snapped his fingers at ribs and ran back into the drugstore. "You back again?" asked the toothpaste clerk. "What do you want this time? String and paper to wrap your dog in?" "No, sir," said Henry. "I want one of those big nickel shopping bags." He laid his last nickel on the counter. "Well, I'll be," said the clerk, and he handed the bag across the counter. Henry opened the bag and set it on the floor. He picked up Ridsby and shoved him behind, feet first, into the bag. Then he pushed his front feet in. A lot of Ridsby was left over. The clerk was leaning over the counter, watching. "I guess I'll have some string and some paper, too," Henry said, "if I can have some for free." "Well, now I've seen everything." The clerk shook his head, and he handed a piece of string and a big sheet of paper across the counter. Ribsby whimpered, but he still held still while Henry wrapped the paper loosely around his head and shoulders and tied it with the string. The dog made a lumpy package, but by taking one handle of the bag in each hand, Henry was able to carry it to the bus stop. He didn't think the bus driver would notice him. It was getting dark, and a crowd of people, most of them with packages, was waiting on the corner. A few spatters of rain hit the pavement. This time, Henry remembered his dime. Both hands were full, so he held the dime in his teeth and stood behind the woman with the bag of apples. Ribsby wiggled and whined, even though Henry tried to pet him through the paper. When the bus stopped, he climbed on behind the lady, quickly set the bag down, dropped his dime in the slot, picked up the bag, squirmed through the crowd to a seat beside a man near the back of the bus. Whew! Henry sighed with relief. The driver was the same one he had met on the first bus, but Ribs was on the bus at last. Now, if he could only keep him quiet for 15 minutes, they would be home, and Ribsby would be his for keeps. The next time the bus stopped, Henry saw Scooter McCarthy, a fifth grader at school, get on and make his way through the crowd to the back of the bus. "Just my luck," thought Henry. "I'll bet he wants to know what's in my bag." "Hi," said Scooter. "Hi," said Henry. "What you got in the bag?" asked Scooter. "None of your beeswax," answered Henry. Scooter looked at Henry. Henry looked at Scooter. Crackle, crackle, crackle went the bag. Henry tried to hold it more tightly between his knees. "There's something alive in that bag," Scooter said. "Shh," whispered Henry. "Shh, yourself," said Scooter. "You got something alive in that bag." By this time, the passengers at the back of the bus were staring at Henry and his package. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Henry tried to pat Ribsby again through the paper. The bag crackled even louder. Then it began to wiggle. "Come on, tell us what's in the bag," said the man. "Nothing," stammered Henry. "Just something I found." "Maybe it's a rabbit," suggested one passenger. "I think it's kicking." "No, it's too big for a rabbit," said another. "I'll bet it's a baby," said Scooter. "I bet you have a baby in there." "I do not." Ribs began to whimper and then to howl. Crackle, 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 thump, thump, thump. Ribsy scratched his way out of the bag. "Well, I'll be," exclaimed the man, and he began to laugh. "It's just a skinny old dog," said Scooter. "He is not. He's a good dog." Henry tried to keep Ribsby between his knees. The bus lurched around a corner and started to go uphill. Henry was thrown against the man. The frightened dog wiggled away from him, squirming between the passengers, and started for the front of the bus. Uh-oh. "Here, Ribsby, old dog, come back here," called Henry, and started after him. "Ah, a dog!" squealed the lady with the bag of apples. "Go away!" Ribsby was scared. He tried to run and crashed into the lady's bag of apples. The bag tipped over, and the apples began to roll down the back of the bus, which was grinding up a steep hill. The apples rolled around the feet of the people who were standing. Passengers began to slip and slide. They dropped their packages and grabbed one another. Crash! A high school girl dropped an armload of books. Rattle, bang, crash! A lady dropped a big paper bag. The bag broke open and pots and pans rolled out. Thud! A man dropped a coil of garden hose. The hose rolled and the passengers found it wound around their legs. People were sitting on the floor. They were sitting on books and apples. They were even sitting on each other's laps. Some of them had their hats over their faces and their feet in the air. Screech! The driver threw on the brake and turned around in his seat just as Henry made his way through the apples and books and pans and hose to catch Risby. The driver pushed his cap back on his head. "Okay, Sonny," he said to Henry. "Now you know why dogs aren't allowed on buses." "Yes, sir," said Henry in a small voice. "I'm sorry." "You're sorry? A lot of good that does. Look at this bus. Look at those people." "I didn't mean to make any trouble," said Henry. "My mother said I could keep the dog if I could bring him home on the bus." The man that had sat beside him began to snicker. Then he chuckled. Then he laughed and he roared. He laughed until tears streamed down his cheeks, and all the other passengers were laughing too. Even the man with the hose and the lady with the apples. But the driver didn't laugh. "Take that dog and get off the bus," he ordered. Ribsby whimpered and tucked his tail between his legs. The man stopped laughing. "See here, driver," he said, "you can't put that boy and his dog off in the rain." "Well, he can't stay on the bus," said the driver. Henry didn't know what he was going to do. He'd guess he'd walk the rest of the way home. He wasn't sure he knew the way in the dark. Just then a siren screamed. It grew louder and louder until it stopped right alongside the bus. A policeman appeared in the entrance. "Is there a boy called Henry Huggins in this bus?" "Oh boy, you're going to be arrested for having a dog on the bus," said Scooter. "I bet you'll have to go to jail." "I'm him," said Henry in a small voice. "You'd better come along with us," said the policeman. "Boy, you're going to get it," said Scooter. "Surely going to get it," said the apple lady. Henry and Risby followed the police off the bus and into the squad car where Henry and the dog sat in the back seat. "Are you going to arrest me?" Henry asked timidly. "Well, I don't know. Do you think you ought to be arrested?" "No, sir," said Henry politely. He thought the policeman was joking, but he wasn't sure. Hard to tell about grown-ups sometimes. "I didn't mean to do anything. I just had to get Ribsby home. My mother said I could keep him if I could bring him home on the bus." "What do you think?" the officer asked his partner, who was driving the squad car. "Well, I think we might let him off this time," answered the driver. "His mother must be pretty worried about him if she called the police, and I don't think she'd want him to go to jail." "Yes, he's late for his dinner already. Let's see how fast we can get him home." The driver pushed a button and the siren began to shriek. Ribsby raised his head and howled. The tires sucked at the wet pavement and the windshield wipers split-flop. Henry began to enjoy himself. Wouldn't this be something to tell the kids at school? Automobiles pulled over to the curb as the police car went faster and faster. Even the bus Henry had been on had to pull over and stop. Henry waved to the passengers. They waved back. Up the hill, the police car sped around the corner until they came to his street and to Henry's block and then pulled up in front of his house. Henry's mother and father were standing on the porch waiting for him. The neighbors were looking out of their windows. "Well," said his father after the policeman had gone, "it's about time you came home. So this is Ribsby. I've heard about you, fellow. And there's a big bone and a can of flea flakes waiting for you." "Henry, what will you do next?" sighed his mother. "Mom, I didn't do anything. I just brought my dog home on the bus like you said." Ribsby sat down and began to scratch. So I guess Mom and Dad were so worried about him, they called the police. But he was safe and sound. He was just late because he kept waiting for the right bus to take him home. Okay, so you have some questions to answer in your Google Classroom. That's the end of the first chapter.